Welcome to the Some Say podcast. I'm Holly. I'll be your host. And my goal here is to inspire, encourage, and entertain you guys by speaking with creators of all kinds. That includes, but is not limited to, artists, writers, mothers, fathers, whoever creates without expecting to be paid. Why do you create what you do? What helps you keep going? Come and talk to me on the record. Visit the website at hollymeaton.wixsite.com/somesay. Send me an email from there and let's talk. On our show today, our very first show, I speak with Micah Zevin. He's a poet, the curator of the Risk of Discovery reading series. He's a librarian, and he's also my husband, so be forewarned. Mike is a great writer and a great person, and today I got him to speak to me on the mic about why he writes just about every morning and what keeps him going. You know, what keeps him going through the tough times, what keeps him going through the poetry rejections, and he also lets us know why he believes you should put your creations out into the world. Enjoy. So here we are with Micah Zevin.
Hey.
Micah, what's going on?
A lot.
Long time no see.
Yeah.
For those of you who aren't aware, Micah is my husband, and so that is a little joke. But Micah, I wanted to obviously have you on the program for some really great reasons. You're definitely an artist who does what they love to do and does not usually get paid for it. So what kind of things are you working on right now and why?
This month I'm working on a project for a press in Mississippi called Tupelo Press.
Okay.
And it's called the 3030 Project, and this was suggested to me by a former student that I went to MFA program with, that it was like a
classmate?
Yeah, classmate who was good it would be like good exposure, and it just stimulate your writing and take you outside of your normal routine and write a poem a day
a poem every day.
Yeah.
So can I ask, are you actually writing a poem every day?
Yeah,
or?
I'm actually writing a poem
Okay.
every day. I know some people sort of indicated in the group of people doing this that they would just take it out of their manuscript that
Yeah,
they're
of
working
course.
on or whatever, because every day it's very difficult, like to have
Yes.
one on call, a poem on call at all times.
Right.
Yeah, but I sort of was like, okay, this is a challenge. Why not I write some new material, because I'm always like, for the next manuscript, and
Okay.
why not I challenge
So you set
myself?
the challenge.
Yeah, even though not every poem is equal, and every day it's hard to come up with poems because sometimes the method by which I'm coming up with the poems, I have to mix it up. Maybe I have to write in a form one time. Maybe I have to make up my own form, give myself a prompt.
Okay.
Or just riff off of stuff I see in the newspaper or from some article I've read, or
Okay.
just something to get me going.
So let me ask, how is the exercise going for you? And are you finding it like a fun creative activity, or are you finding it more of a chore?
Sometimes I'm finding it like if it hits, it's a lot of fun.
Okay.
And if I'm just not feeling it that morning, it's a little bit more like an assignment. But
Right.
But sometimes assignments can be good, and
Absolutely.
Good work can come out of assignments, because it'll make me write a poem that I maybe never would have otherwise written.
Okay.
And so that's how that's going. And but I'm coming up with some. I think I'm coming up with some really good poems, and I'm kind of incorporating a little bit of how for my reading series, how I make up poetry prompts for
Right.
that. I'm incorporating some of that, but on for a whole month, which is
Okay.
also a challenge, because
Okay.
I only do that for one day for the day that my reading is.
That's great. So actually, that's a great That's a great lead into your reading. What's it called?
It's called the Risk of Discovery Reading Series,
Okay.
and it's every third Tuesday of the month at Blue Cups Cafe in Woodside, Queens.
Great. So how did you get that gig? How did you start a reading? What made you start a reading? How
Right.
did that get started?
Like maybe a few months after I graduated my MFA in poetry from the New School, someone was posting something on Facebook, like some comedian at this new place that was starting in Astoria.
Okay.
And they asked like, oh, we're looking for like an open mic reading series,
Right.
and I was like, okay, can I do that? This is like seemed like an opportunity. I wanted to build a community in Queen. You keep that community going of when I was in the MFA program, because that was the whole point of it, is like making friends and learning
Building a
from other
community.
people and building a
Yeah,
community. And I was
absolutely.
like, I live in Queens, and I know the scene in Queens kind of had been starting to build, and there were a lot of writers and artists and actors and whatnot that live in Queens, but
Absolutely.
you don't hear so much about like events that they're putting on it, or
Right.
things actually happening in Queens. It's sort of like not really a backwater, but it's just like people don't want to lug out to Queens, don't want to come out to Queens.
I
Sometimes.
hear that. Yes, absolutely. Well, sometimes it's harder to get people to just travel, and Woodside's not that far out, but
No.
it's a little bit difficult, especially for a lot of people living in Brooklyn.
Right. It depends on the audience, and a lot
Sure.
of people from my program live in Brooklyn, and
Sure.
there's a lot of things, a lot of reading series in Brooklyn and literary attractions in Brooklyn. that
Right,
are happening.
absolutely. So, how have you found doing the series? Have you had fun doing it, and what keeps you doing it?
Yeah, at times I've had a lot of fun, and what keeps me doing it is just the people who come and the people who actually do the poetry prompts when I hand them out. It's a no pressure situation. I'm trying to make it a no pressure situation. At
Right.
first, I did for a second think about making it like a little paid workshop, and that didn't seem to work so well in terms of enthusiasm because writers don't have a lot of money to spare. But I did that, and people would sometimes do it. Some really good writers would just like on the spot write that poem, and it would just click, and I'd be amazed. They just wrote it sitting there,
Right.
and it felt like almost a completed work as far
Right.
as you can tell in that situation. But it was just like pretty amazing. So that's very flattering in a way that like I just made that thing up, and they just instantly did it. So that's the risk and discovery portion of the series, and that definitely keeps me doing it, because sometimes logistical concerns can get annoying
Sure.
when you're arranging reading series.
Sure.
Like for a time I was trying to pay writers through like literary organization in New York that do that, but that can become somewhat convoluted, like in terms of what's available,
Well,
funding that's available.
grants go away, so that's
Right.
also part of that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, of course. So the fact that you don't have a steady stream of income to pay writers, and you're not getting paid, like, what makes it worth it aside from, you find these writers who sometimes come up with these amazing poems.
Right.
You find people who sometimes are great readers.
Right.
Like, what's the other driving force that keeps you going?
I mean, it's an intimate setting. It's a little cafe. I mean, I've been at several different venues before this that were larger and wanted me to charge covers for,
Oh, sure.
for very good reasons.
Sure.
And it's hard to sustain that. I'm not like, there's some series that are sort of like institutions unto themselves, like
Yes.
that have been around forever,
Yes.
and they can do that. But I'm sort of like, this is okay. My series is different in that it's small and intimate, and bring your friends, and we'll have a strong cup of coffee, and we'll eat a pastry, and there's no, at this current incarnation, there is no microphone. You just have to talk. It's just it's just like, it's a little community gathering, and we're
And it's
sharing
an
our
intimate
work,
space,
and
right?
we're telling stories. Very small. It's like
Yeah.
a tiny railroad apartment.
Yeah. That's a good comparison,
The
actually.
people who run the place are very friendly. I meet people through other readings and other things that I host at, and I get them to do that one, and then they come to mine after that.
Right.
And at my best, I try to go to other people's reading series, and then I'll meet people there and tell them what I read a poem at that open mic of someone I know, and share my reading series, and then I've gotten people that way. And it's just what keeps me doing is like I want to continue the building of the community, and
That's great.
it's good for my work. It's good for the work of people who come there, and they can add it on to their resume of readings that they do. And some of them, just like some readers, there's some poets and writers and of all sorts, they like to read and be around other poets and writers. And there's been a little bit of, I've had a few interviews about the reading series, and there's been a little buzz about it, even though it's smaller than some. So yeah, and that's enough to keep me going besides my day job.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you, let me just ask you as a writer and as a poet, how do you push through days where, you want to put the pencil or the pen down? Like, how do you motivate yourself when really we're not in school and no one's asking you for your work? Like, how do you push through and get it done?
Well, I'm kind of like an anxious. I can be an anxious person, and all over the in terms of all over the place, and my thought processes. So over the course of the last 10 years, I came up with a thing where I would write every morning. I just like, no matter what, I'm gonna write something down in my notebook, whether it's the worst kind of like diary entry, rant, complaint about the day, whatever happened that day, or me just playing with like making a puzzle of words and turning them into something, and or from like the newspaper or articles. That was the way I was like, I always have to do something so that I can't be like, because I feel like if I stop writing, then I won't come back to it. There's some writers who can do that and like not write for months and months and months and then come back to it, but it wouldn't work for me. I need to have that focus and discipline and projects to work on and future ideas to keep me going.
That's great. That's great. Give me an example of a moment where you felt like everything was clicking. So as far as your writing goes, or even as far as reading goes, anything along the sort of, writing or artistic line, give me an example when it all sort of came together and you felt that like, oh, this is what I'm doing this for.
Oh, you mean like from the beginning or just recent events?
Anything that applies.
Okay, like well, I did this reading for the Heavy Feather Review, and another journal, and I was at the Pete's Candy Store in Brooklyn.
Right.
And my friend of mine hosts that. And
what's your friend's name?
His name's Bill Lassard. He's one of the editors of the poetry and I think another section. And he invited me out along with other poets that he knows, and it was just like that's a sense a community, and I like premiered those new poems that were going to be published in the Heavy Feather Review. They're in October sometime coming up, and it was like it was like something in the air. It just felt good. Like whether I'm nervous or not, I get up on the stage and I get in that like performance mode, and it's very supportive. Not that you always need that. I don't necessarily pay so much attention, but it just was a very supportive environment, and fellow writers who are very talented, and like that's what you do. That's what you do it for. Like you write in silence by yourself wherever you're doing it in transit or at home or wherever, and when you go do these readings, that's the reason to do it, because you're sharing it with other people who also love writing and reading and are rooting for one another.
Yes.
That's what you want it to be about. You meet other people, you root for them. Don't want to get wrapped in the poem wars, which is a thing.
What's the poem wars?
Well, the poem wars is just like there's elite people in the poetry world, and they get on Facebook sometimes or social media, and they sort of like argue over
like quality over
the quality of the work, or what's being written and what's legitimate. Like,
I see.
The Insta poets versus the people in the Kenyon Review.
I see. Okay. So when it's all said and done, why poetry?
I mean, it was just something about poetry attracted me, and I did dabble in storytelling and tried my hand at sci-fi writing at the beginning when I was doing these type of things, because that's like my parents read to me when I was a kid a lot, and they read me unusual things. Maybe you don't like they're both teachers, so they read to me mythological, a lot of mythological stories and that kind of thing. And I thought maybe I'll write sci-fi because I was into sci-fi.
Right.
And at some point in college, like my first year of college, I wrote for the literary journal, and I was into heavy metal music, so I was like, oh, why don't I write? I don't know, I was compelled for some reason. I don't know if I have a particular moment to write. Let me write some. My friend asked me, like, why don't you write something for the literary journal? And and I wrote like heavy metal ballad style poems,
Oh, okay.
with like trains in them and like ominous, anxious, like horror sounds and whatever, like that kind of thing that kind of thing you can think of, where it's just sort of like, eerie, eerie, dark, like poems you write when you live in a basement dorm room with a very strange roommate with very little light.
Right. Okay. Okay. What do you think so far your biggest lesson coming away from just your years of writing? You've put in the MFA time. Now you've gotten a lot of publications. I know you're still obviously always applying for things, but what's the biggest lesson that you've learned so far as your career in poetry?
You have to. It's like it's the cliche, but it's like you got to keep going, because
Right.
if you are going to wait for some sort of like prestigious recognition to just like fall into your lap, it's not
Right.
going to happen that way. Sometimes things come in threes, like little successes. Like I got you 3 poems in a row, Paul. But you're not going to, that's rare, and
Right.
like you just got to keep plugging away as if those things you just applied for almost never happened.
Right.
Because if you don't, it's easier to get yourself discouraged, and it does happen to me. And then just like I get annoyed at, like I try to get my annoyance out of the way quickly. Like I just like, oh, this one was just not accepted. Boo, and then get mad, and then like, all right, forget about it.
Right.
On to the next.
Right.
So, yeah, that's really what you have to do, because you're not going to make money doing this unless you are like find the secret sauce, the secret formula, like some of these Insta poets on Twitter are doing. God bless them, really, but like who have attracted a young audience of enthusiastic readers. But like they're a different age than me. They're like generally younger, but you just got you're not in it for the money. You're in it for like you have to release these things from inside of you, and
Right.
there's something fueling that, and anxiety, a need to express yourself, love of language and play,
Yes.
all that.
Yes. Agreed. All right. So now, I guess to sort of bring it back a little bit, what is the most fulfilling part of all of this for you?
The most fulfilling part of all of it is that is when I go to, like, when I do my reading and I go to readings, and people, those rare moments when people come up to you and like say they liked your poem, or they remember a
Right.
line from it, or they just it's really it's really about recognition and acknowledgement, and also just when I'm alone writing and I feel I'm having a good moment, like just like I feel the good energy writing,
Right.
just like where it's just sort of like I'm in a daze of writing, where I'm just like I write by hand mostly. I don't write on my
Right.
computer, because
Right.
the tactile thing I think brings out more interesting like language, and
I agree.
so
And you can edit easier, right? Like, so
Yeah.
if you write it all out
Right.
and then you type it up later,
Right.
that's kind of where your editing comes in.
I mean, I'm nutty. I sometimes will like cross out as I'm
Yeah, of
like if I'm
course.
pausing in between like thoughts, I cross things out. I don't. This is not where it started, or I'm starting over again, or. But it's my notebook. I can do whatever I want, and I don't have to feel sad that I desecrated the notebook. So, yeah, I can continue. Although I get mad, I'm like, I don't like crossing out things in the notebook, but
Right.
I can keep going.
Right. No, absolutely. I think giving yourself permission to I don't want to say mess up, but to make a little bit of a mess.
Right.
I think that's really important.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Writing is failure. Writing is about fail. A lot of it's about failure, like failing and trying again, and failing and trying again.
Right.
And
And
whatever
just
that
making
means.
it better
Yeah.
and getting it stronger and, kind of going from A to Z and figuring out, all right, Q didn't work, but
Right.
let's see what does.
Right, and like things like I used to think when I was at the your professors teach you to like some professors say let it sit and gestate there. Some say instantly revise that poem and send
Right.
it out, and I've kind of come around to the instantly revise that poem and send it out if you have any like good feelings about it. Yes, keep revising, but there's poets who revise the same poem who've written famous poems like forever and ever and ever, and sometimes that brought them a couple of like fantastic famous poems, but it's not going to be for every poem. Maybe some subject matters are harder to write about, and so I'll come to those later in life, but because the personal ones. But
Right, of course.
yeah, currently I kind of do a mix of everything.
Yeah. As far as, subject matter goes and mixing things up and going from impersonal to personal, is there a tried and true thing that you depend upon when you need to write a poem? So for example, for your 30/30 poems, for it's Tupelo Press, right?
Yes.
If you wake up and your mind's a bit of a blank, what's a trick that you'll use to sort of get you going and get you into a poem?
Maybe I'll take some old newspapers and I'll like flip through them and see if a couple of words pop out at me, or I'll go to like some like NPR. I'll listen to the radio,
Right.
see if any subject matter they're talking about, interesting language, whoever they're interviewing, writer, war correspondent, journalist, whatever,
Right.
and see. I'll just look at my phone, or I have a book that I got at I got it from a conference that a teacher assigned, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but basically it teaches you how to write in forms, but it's sort of like write in form
In poetic forms?
in poetic
Right.
forms, but break the rules at the same time. It's sort of like an American version of the stodgy form writing, like what I'd say, like write a sonnet or a pantoum or a villanelle. Like I like to do the ones that have repeating lines because
Right.
that's sort of like a music. It's like you're writing a song, like a ballad.
Is that Strong Measures? Is that the
Yeah,
is that the
stronger.
book?
Yeah, Strong Measures.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember who the editor is, but that was definitely when we were in Iowa, and it's just like a lot of creative things came out of that because it's not something I normally do, but I pull that out of the arsenal once in a while when I'm stuck,
Yeah.
and I'll be like, okay, let's write a terza rima and just see if I can follow all the rules. But in the end, I may not follow the rules if I need to cut or add something that makes the poem better. That doesn't matter.
Right.
Like with a sonnet, like I write something called Broken American Sonnet, and I don't follow these the rules of rhyme and meter and measure for that. I just like the Broken American Sonnet is like in any language I want. It's just 14 lines.
Okay.
That's what makes it broken, because you're not like trying to do rhymes oblique or obvious or any you
Right.
just if you do, but it's just like 14. It's just like that keeps a restriction. Like when I do my prompts, I make write a 14-line sonnet with these 5 words with this title, or the first line is this and the last line is that,
Right.
or when I mix it up, I'll be like line number 5 is this and line number 12 is that,
Right.
and then write that poem.
Right.
And that's an exercise.
So you're more content over form
Yes.
when it comes down to it.
Yeah. But
Okay.
having a form is helpful to someone like me because when you're sending out to journals, like they don't. It's just like if it seems like it's an amalgamation of just like random things and free verse, and it doesn't have any. It's just like a blob. So I used to write these things that look like a blob on the page, and there are a lot
Right.
of interesting stuff in them.
Right.
But maybe the reader.
But no structure.
Structure really.
Right.
People be distracted.
Right.
And they'll be like, maybe you should I had editors at first like, maybe you should write prose. So
I see. So that's where that comment came from, where you should concentrate on prose because it looked like prose.
yes, correct.
That's funny. Because
I mean, I have some story poems, but they're
Sure.
not the majority. But although the story ones are sort of magical when they happen because
Of course.
they're often good. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because when I was in when I was in grad school getting my MFA, it was very much, structure was beaten into me, let's just say. But as I've gotten older and more experienced, I do see why it's important, why it's more, I never quite saw the importance of it until, the last few years. But I love what you're saying about how at least, you start there, but you don't let it restrain you. You don't let it confine you. And sometimes you actually break out of it.
Yeah, sometimes it's useful to use that stuff, and I'm like, there's writers who feel they have to be experimental all the time, and that's how they create their art. I know some of those writers, and I'm not always agreeing that creates the best art. It's like they're doing painting on a page. It's sort of like the people who do abstract poetry. I don't always understand what they're doing, but I appreciate what their attempt. But they're often against the dead poets because they want to live in the present, where there's diverse range of poets who are from all races and religions and cultures, and they see that as something that's like taking the backwards.
Well, I absolutely, I agree with that, at least at the base, right? I think that it's important to go from one to the other extreme, honor the traditionalists, respect some of the canon, and then take it and make it your own, look at other voices, and obviously, give them voice. That's exactly what we're doing here. Because I think that the world is richer when we see it through, not just one set of eyes or one school.
Right. Because I'll read people I don't think I like them. I won't just ignore them. I'll be like, why don't I like them? And sometimes I'll come back to things years later, and I'll be like, why did I say I didn't like them?
They're interesting. Do you have an example of that you can actually name?
It's
okay if you don't. I'm just curious because there have been a few authors like that. It's usually fiction writers.
Right.
Where I'm not into their style, and often I won't go back to them. A few times I have.
Right. There's definitely difficult, like the Brothers Karamazov. I didn't read that till later in life, and because it was very difficult. But I later became to appreciate a lot of things of it because of things I had learned in school that made it more
accessible.
Just like it applied. Like you get a little bit older, it's very complicated. Even Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. I can't say that I entirely understand that when I read that as
I see.
Even in my high level AP class.
Sure.
I appreciated it was beautiful language.
Right.
Now I see it as that's generations and generations of people.
Right.
And the magical realism and all.
Like a fever dream. Yeah,
it was
magical realism.
Yeah, I see it differently now. Even reading Lord of the Rings now from when I was a child is different. Because
that's interesting.
It's very complicated, Lord of the Rings, if you read those stories. Whatever the movies did to it, it's very complicated fantasy world.
Right.
It's World War II it's based on his connection to that. So there's a lot of I don't know if I can name a specific poet or not, but there's just maybe when I was younger I didn't like Allen Ginsberg. Might have been at first,
really?
And not at first. My parents told me. My parents they sort of they introduced me to certain things. They weren't really history. They teach history, but they introduced me to literature because he wrote things that were connected to the time periods in which he lived that were very current about civil rights and activism and gay rights movement and whatever else you can think of. And I don't think I didn't like it at first, and it might have just been because they told me to read it. Or Whitman.
Sure.
Those are things you come to a little bit when you decide to be.
And often when you're assigned something as a kid, it is homework, right? So it doesn't just feel like homework; it is homework. So I think that if you decide to become a writer and then you look at these formative texts that are important in the culture, then it becomes a thing of okay, well, why? And when you're giving yourself homework, right, it's a little bit different than somebody saying you have to read this.
Right. Now I just I read a lot of things randomly, whether it's I read a lot of memoirs for whatever reason of people that I like, whether they're poets writing memoirs or celebrity, actor, whatever, just whatever, whatever interests me. And I go through periods where I read a lot of fiction too. so that informs my poetry in a
Right.
different way. I don't just read poetry
Right.
exclusively, although I'll like research and look at the journals and read what my friends are writing. But I can't always afford to buy everyone's books, unfortunately, as much as I want to. So I kind of have to rely on the internet or what I can get from the library. What I
Right.
can get from the library, and
Because you're a librarian.
right.
Of course. No, that makes total sense. All right, so before we go today, then this is a great way. You've kind of led me right up to the wrap up question. Who are some of your biggest inspirations who are playing in your head right now? I mean, I know we could probably do another whole interview about this, and you kind of touched on it already.
Right.
But who are some of the inspirations for you that you're looking at and drawing on currently?
I mean, I always go back to Yusuf Komunyakaa.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily, like, you don't look at it and be like, oh, he just wrote a Yusuf Komunyakaa poem. No. I'm always inspired by his sort of lyrical uniqueness and, like, very specificity of language, and just sort of, like, he writes, like, these almost mythological, grimy, murky poems that are, like, swampy. So I feel like they're swampy sometimes. Almost it comes
What do you
from-
mean by swampy?
Like, maybe even the way he reads it, it's just like, maybe it's his accent. Whenever you go hear him read, it's like hearing like a praying mantis. It's like hearing a praying mantis like hiss in like the swamp, like it's not like flying around. It's flying around from branch to branch, and you hear it sort of like, it's like the sound of nature almost sometimes when you hear Yusuf Komunyakaa at his best reading. I haven't heard him in a while. Like now and again, I haven't, like, I used to be more mainstream poets. Now I'm all around a lot more underground, lesser known poets who are
Right.
like, they're definitely involved. They're definitely involved in groups that read together. But like, he was one that really got to me. And there were some people who were my teachers that maybe I didn't like their poems at first that I've come to appreciate, like Lucy Brock-Broido, like, who just recently passed away. May she rest in peace. And who, whether people, like, she was a difficult poet, wrote in a very stylized, like, she wrote poems based on Emily Dickinson's Master Letters and other things like that. She's just very specific language, like beauteous, archaic
Right.
language, but she was
Right.
herself. Like, what I appreciate about her is that there really is no one like her, even though she's using like old language that has been used by old romantic poets like the Coleridge or Wordsworth type poems.
She kind of took a very specific style and made it her own.
She took a very circuitous route, and like, even her current poems sort of have a lot more modern type things in it, that she incorporated modern type styles into it. But I always come back to the people that I read when I started going to conferences, like Mark Doty and Stanley Kunitz, and I just read a book by a very current young poet named Sam Sachs. That was he's a young gay Jewish poet. Very fantastic book.
What's it called? Do you remember?
I cannot remember right now.
That's okay.
It has a yellow cover. That doesn't
okay.
help. I mean, I review books, sometimes too, and I get to read those books. And
That's amazing.
And
yeah, I think that's really great that that's somewhere you're putting, your kind of review analytical side, to work, because I think that sort of helps you put ideas into writing, instead of having them all sort of like in your brain.
Right.
And I know they come out in your poetry sometimes, but I love that you're reviewing other artists' work.
And I can't wait for my fellow writers who come to my readings to have their books, who don't have books yet to have books, because like I said, like Bill Lassard, for example.
Sure.
I can't wait for his book, because he is a super creative poet who can surprise you.
That's great.
All the time.
Excellent. I think that's a great place to stop for now. Would you read a poem for us?
Sure.
Okay, so we'll do that in just a moment. Before ending our very first Some Say podcast with Micah Zebin reading one of his own poems, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you for your ears. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your support and encouragement, either now or over the years. If you've ever come to see one of my plays, anything, thank you. Next, and this is pretty closely related. If you are one of those people and you're a creator, or if you know someone who is a creator or an artist and would like to talk to me on the record, please let me know at somesaypodcast@gmail.com. We have more information on the show and on upcoming guests at hollyameaton.wixsite.com/somesay. All right, find out all the information. Everything I'm doing is going to go there. And finally, that leads into I've recently been accepted to an artist residency in Vermont. It's called VSC, or the Vermont Studio Center. Details will go up on social media. I will be posting an Indiegogo, and I'm really excited about this, guys. So if you can contribute in any way, whether that's, monetarily or by spreading the word to maybe somebody who can, I appreciate it. I really do. I would love for anyone who can chip in to do so. But if you can forward it to, wonderful. This is the kind of thing where taking a moment to do your work, as many of you already know, it can really put the next project you're working on track. So there will be more about that online. I can't wait. We already have 3 episodes recorded and several more to come scheduled on the books. Get at me. somesaypodcast@gmail.com if you'd like to be on or if you know someone who would. All right. Signing off for now, but talk soon. Have a good one.
I'm going to read a poem from Tupelo Press 3030 project at tupelopress.org. And this is day 3 of the September 3030 project that I'm going to read, that I wrote. And it's called, "The Story Does Not Have to Be True to Be True, or It Is What It Is Until It Isn't. Do we covet juggling acts in a hurricane? I will say my face is not my face in front of your face, and that I have many faces yet to go through. I was forged out of you, pockmarks and perfections. I cannot hear prayers, I can only hear screams on a hot Monday morning 2 minutes before noon. The price of being direct can be silence if delivered with judgments and paradox. The gunshots are not gunshots, the delusion is not a delusion. The protesters are not protesters, but fake news actors working to eat one more day. Will you let us be? Will you continue to bother me? Why isn't anything clearer looking in a mirror? I am fascinated by your teeter-totter of views and actions. Incumbent, you will be pickled and left to think about what you have done until you become pickles, crunched out of existence at a holiday barbecue where no one is campaigning for you. The forgotten are being forgotten again, and before their funerals. My hypocrisy is your hypocrisy. I am the last butterfly. It is what it is until it isn't anymore." Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Micah.